Well, we've spent the last 3 weeks talking about consciousness, but that is quite a long time from now when that work will come to fruition, about 10 to 15 years. This week we're going to put our feet firmly back on the ground, but still talk about the future. We're going to talk about machine reasoning. So what is machine reasoning? Well, we understand what machine learning is. Machine learning is interpreting patterns, such as recognizing an image of a dog or a cat and so on, where there's a large amount of data and the algorithm learns how to interpret that data. Machine reasoning builds on top of machine learning. What it does is you can categorize what the subject, say, you're talking about, and then have another pattern recognition of categories. And then perhaps another layer on top of that of more and more types of categorization and reasoning. Now, I know the machine learning people are actually trying to build this in to the machine learning mechanisms. But my view is that even though that might be the long-term approach, in the short term there are some tricks that you can do where you have multiple components and build these layers of machine learnings based on categories and actually get this level of machine reasoning. Now, in my previous videos I've also mentioned two other things. One is the fact that the brain is running a simulation of the real world, and it's that simulation which we have to emulate in an artificial intelligence brain. And the other is this concept of context. Now, context is a very difficult term because it's been misused over the years, and even like 2 years ago Google were announcing that they could do context, but the reality was they could do some aspects of context, and in fact what I call subject context. That is, if I in one sentence say I am thinking of something, then the subject I can be used in the next context, so without having to say I again. But the reality is that context is a lot more complicated than just one item of context, and this diagram actually shows all the different types of context which you should consider. For example, the environment you're living in, like the current weather or your location; external content, such as world events happening, such as a pop star dying; social context, of which can be divided into 3 types, in terms of whether you're talking formally or informally. That's particularly with other languages other than English that becomes very important. And then there's what's called sentiment analysis, but I call empathy level, which is just to know whether there is an understanding between the two people talking. And then there's all sorts of other things, like if you're actually an engineer and you're like a computer person, then you start to use jargon, and you've got a jargon social context. You also have humour, you have the conversational history, and you also have this concept of what I call honesty social context, which is whether or not you're actually using your information to tell white lies. Now, the context is the data, if you like, and the processing of that data is the simulation, and this is where we've got to understand these contexts and create a model, an internal model in the AI of these types of contexts that can be used to further conversation. I mean, the obvious one is the history context. You've got to know what you've previously mentioned and previously said in order to understand what you're now going to say. And the reason why it's also a simulation is because there are cases where you get the wrong end of the stick in a conversation. For example, you might start off and actually start building a model, a simulation of the conversation, and get it totally wrong, and then halfway through you realise effectively you got the wrong end of the stick, and then you build the new model of what the new reality is, or your new understanding of that reality. So what we end up with is a hierarchy of categorized contexts, which are then used to create effectively an understanding of what's in that conversation. As I say, this is what's going to be built over the next 5 years, and the result will be total understanding in conversations, and this will form the main user interface to any problem or any issue for a robot or a way of interacting with humans between robots. So this is in fact the last episode in the first series of AI without jargon. We hope to do further episodes, and it really depends on you, the audience, on whether or not you're subscribing and liking these first 11 videos. If you do like them, please do subscribe and like them, and this will give us more impetus to create more episodes. But for now, this is the last one for several weeks or even months, and we'll see you in the future.